Okay, folks, we're going to start. Thank you so much for joining us today on behalf of Imperial County SELPA and Imperial County Office of Education and our Senior Director, Dr. Deborah Montoya. I want to welcome you all to, I believe this is our sixth session of our Administrators Institute. We want to thank you for your participation, for taking time away from your busy schedule. I know some of you are currently multitasking, joining us and doing other things. So again, we appreciate your time and effort and commitment to join us. Today, we are going to be focusing on Chapter 6 of the Practitioner's Guide. I have dropped the link to the slide deck as well as the accompanying resources in the chat box, but you have it here as well, the link and the QR code, so feel free to access the slide deck and the presentation. As a matter of fact, folks, the slide deck might not be in there just yet, but I promise to drop it in the Padlet shortly after this training, but you can access the slide deck via that link. So if you do me a favor and drop your name, your organization where you work, and your current position, and if you could also specify for us if you are in the general education side of the building or the special education side of the building, the EL department. We really want to get a good gauge of who is in the room and what your respective role and responsibilities are. It helps kind of guide our dialogue and conversation, and also informs us moving forward to be able to meet your very specific needs regarding your responsibilities and roles. So if you could do that, that would be great. Thank you so much. In the meantime, I want to again welcome you on behalf of our team. There are 4 of us taking the helm in this work statewide. We are part of the statewide system of support. We're led by our Senior Director, Dr. Deborah Montoya, and it's important for you to know that this project, Improving Outcomes for English Learners with Disabilities, is very near and dear to her heart, because actually it's her dissertation coming to life. And so all of us are very passionate in helping support this work, and are very hopeful that it will continue through these workshops, technical assistance, and resources that we're providing statewide. So again, thank you on behalf of our team. I also want to point out a little bit about the dynamics of our team, and I'll start with myself. My background by training is elementary education. When I first stepped foot in this world, I was a kinder, first, and fourth grade teacher before I moved forward and decided that I wanted to take a leadership role and really focus on the needs of English learners. And so for the past this is my 22nd year here at the county office. My focus and area of expertise has been all things English learners, English language development, Title III. I was a regional English learner lead, and continue to provide support through this grant work. My colleagues Vanessa Lopez, Christina Zavala, and our Senior Director, Dr. Deborah Montoya, all have a special education background. And so we bring our respective lens and expertise to this work. We bounce ideas off of each other. We ask each other questions based on our experience. And together we form this multidisciplinary team, if you will, that helps shape and guide this work statewide. So it's important for you to know the dynamics of our team, so that as you move forward and think about how might you lean on your counterparts or the folks across the hall, in the EL department or in the general ed department or in the special ed department, so that we can join forces and our resources and our expertise in really thinking about our current practices, policies, and transforming our policies and systems for the betterment of all of our students, particularly our English learners with disabilities. And again, as stated earlier, we are part of the one system of support. We are the SELPA content lead. We live in Imperial County, as you can see here on the map. We border Mexico and we border the state of Arizona. We're about 100 miles east of San Diego, And depending on where you live in Imperial County, you could be 5 minutes away from Mexicali, Baja California, or 30 minutes away. So we're truly diverse in the sense that we have different geographies around us, and we really appreciate that. It absolutely helps shape our understanding of the different needs of families and students in our region. So again, our grounding of focus are English learners with disabilities. And in the state of California, as you can see here on this slide, almost 30% of our English our students with disabilities are English learners. And that's a pretty significant number. So it really merits us taking some time to think about what are current policies, practices, written or unwritten, that help support the needs of our students with disabilities, particularly our English learners. So given that this is the population that we are talking about and serving, it's important for us to take some time, as we are here today, in our respective leadership roles, to think about and lean on each other, to have those critical, reflective, candid conversations about what's working, what's not working, why is it working, and what are some of the things that we can do right away to start moving the needle and refining our current systems to improve outcomes for English learners and English learners with disabilities. Our grounding resource is the California Practitioner's Guide. This is a guidance document that was prepared by different groups, different experts, and is grounded on research. We are using this resource and have been using this resource to shape our professional development and technical assistance and support. Even though it is not a required document, because it is research-based and has been informed by several experts in the field related to special education and English learners, it is absolutely a rich document that we highly recommend and encourage you to dive in and learn more about. And after all, that's why we're here today. Today's focus is Chapter 6 of the Practitioner's Guide. Just a quick recap of the organization of this guide. There are 5 sections. Each section has chapters within the sections and focus on a certain phase, if you will, of the referral process, beginning from identification of English learners, how the MTSS framework folds into the pre-referral activities and practices that are instrumental in helping us support our English learners before we determined that perhaps they may need additional services through special education assessments, which takes us to section 2 of the Practitioner's Guide, which is everything pre-referral, referral, and assessment, moving into the IEP process. Section 3, which is what we're going to tap into today, is a reference to educational programs and instructional strategies. Today, we're really only going to focus on the services that we are required to provide for English learners with disabilities, which include Title III, as well as all of the provisions of FAPE. Section 4 is a proposing exit of special education services, and the last section of this document is all things reclassification from English learner status. Today we're going to focus on Chapter 6, which lives in Section 3, and our topics for Chapter 6 is educational programming. Oops, sorry about that. Access equity for English learners with disabilities. So here we're really thinking about our current programs that we offer our English learners who have an IEP or a 504. So let's moving forward. And because this is an administrator's session, we are focusing on the 4 questions that are called out in this chapter for administrators. So I'll give you just a moment to read through those questions. And while you are doing that, I also want to point out that our amazing techie, Vanessa Lopez, has created companion infographics for each one of the chapters of the Practitioner's Guide. And what we see here is our Chapter 6 infographic. You can access the infographic directly from the slide deck. You just click on the images and it'll take you directly to the infographic. And when you do that, you can really take a closer look at each of the elements or key elements of Chapter 6 through a more visual perspective, if you will. We really take pride in making a conscientious effort of practicing what we preach and making all of the resources accessible and usable for the range of practitioners and leaders that we are working with and are charged to support through the statewide work. So we would love for you to check out our infographics and the many resources that we have on our website and give us some feedback. Let us know what works for you. What are some of the things that perhaps you are looking for that you haven't found yet, and let us know. We are very open, and rarely do we say no to any project. It sometimes gets us into a little bit of trouble in that we run out of time and resources for a little bit. But again, we really appreciate your feedback and letting us know what's working for you and what are some of the things that you're still looking for that we might be able to assist you with. And before we officially start, I see that our senior director is on the call. I just want to be able to give her a few minutes to welcome you all on behalf of Imperial County SELPA. Debbie, do you have a few words for our participants before we move forward?
Sure. I thank you so much. Lupita will be your main presenter today as she is a great model in our department. We're so very blessed to have all of our team members as we work collaboratively as Lupita being an EL specialist and vast knowledge regarding all things curriculum and instruction. Myself, Christina's here with us today. Vanessa Lopez is not with us during this session, but as we work together, we're consistently leveraging each other's expertise and knowledge from all things instruction, referral processes, special education, all the way up to reclass and so forth. So we're very excited to have you all here together as we collectively work towards improving outcomes for our multilingual learners across the state of California. We hope that you enjoy this session. It's definitely Lupita's wheelhouse as we look deeply at the civil right, that core tier one access that all multilingual learners need, deserve, and have a right to have, which is comprehensive ELD. Never in lieu of special education, but in conjunction with for those students who are eligible and are duly identified English learners with disabilities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lupita. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. I just wanted to make sure to give you the floor and welcome everybody. You need to know who's leading this charge, so thank you for chiming in. So our focus today is chapter 6. As you can see here, we've highlighted some key terms and words to help us focus on what's coming ahead. So our purpose in delving into chapter 6 and its resources is to, again, as leaders, be reflective of our current policies, practices, um, activities that we employ or things that we may need to employ to ensure that all of our English learners with disabilities have full access to the rich curriculum that they deserve, which includes standards-based curriculum and instruction, English language development instruction and services, as well as along with their disability related services. So again, like Debbie said, it's not either or, it is both. And so moving forward, we're going to be sharing some resources that are found within the practitioner's guide and other resources and tools to help you think about and reflect upon your current practices, and perhaps even think about who might you need to reach out to. If you're a general education leader, who in the special education department might you need to reach out to, or perhaps you're already working with. And so these resources are going to help you continue that conversation about your current systems and practices and supports that are designed for English learners with disabilities. So again, our topic today is to really emphasize our must-dos, not the nice things to do, but the things that we absolutely have an obligation to offer for all of our students who are identified as an English learner and have a 504 or an IEP. And so again, the provisions of FAPE, which are specifically designed for our students with disabilities, all English learners with disabilities have the right to a free and appropriate public education. And so when we say that, we say it, we want to make sure that it's actually happening. And what does it look like in order for us to make sure that all of these provisions are actually taking place and that students are receiving the services that they need at the quality and effectiveness that they are designed to be, then we need to take a hard look. We need to take a hard look at what's happening, what might not be happening, and to what degree are these services effective. We also want to ask ourselves, are our students receiving these services in the least restrictive environment? How do we know? How do we know that the current environment is the best environment for their learning, for their language development, and in order for them to meet their identified goals? And again, because we're talking about English learners, we're also talking about the provision of Title III, which this slide will take you directly to the website if you want to learn more about Title III provisions. But you can see here there are basically three areas or three topics. One of them is all about achievement. We want to make sure that our English learners are making progress along with comparable to their English only speaking peers. And so for that, we need to make sure that we're providing the appropriate supports that they need. We also want to make sure that all of our practitioners and leaders, administrators have the training and authorization that they need to be able to provide these very specific supports. And we also want to make sure that English language development acquisition is occurring. As you know, we do have a large percentage of long-term English learners, and it has been a topic of conversation. We've been fielding quite a few questions regarding long-term English learners and the types of supports that they may need on our end, specifically in the area of special education. And so we want to take that into consideration by taking a close look at what English language development looks like for English learners with disabilities. We also have state policy. So state policy in California is the English Learner Roadmap, which is comprised of 4 principles. The English Learner Roadmap is designed to help support districts, LEAs, administrators, and teachers. There are several tools, and a little pitch to our website. If you visit our website, we do have a landing page devoted specifically to the roadmap. You will find many resources and tools that are specifically designed for your respective role. So I encourage you to take some time after our presentation today to further explore the many resources that are designed to support implementation of high quality education, services, training, collaboration, improvement of systems for English learners, which includes English learners with disabilities. But my friend Vanessa always says, if somebody says it better, then give them the floor. So I would like for you to be able to spend some time, just a handful of minutes, to listen to Lori Olson. Dr. Lori Olson has been a champion for English learners in the state of California for decades. She is highly respected in this area. And so in this short video clip, she's going to give us an overview of the goal, the purpose, and the reason why we ought to take some time to become familiar with the English Learner Roadmap principles and use the reflection tools that are designed to help us think about our systems and how might we better improve these systems for English learners. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Lori Olson herself. And before I click on the video, I do want to ask you to be thinking about as she walks us through the 4 principles and she calls them out, be thinking about what that looks like at your respective site or district. So as you are listening to her describe the principles and the goal and purpose for each one, be thinking about, what does that look like in action at my site or district? Can I recall evidence of the principles at my site or district? And again, our purpose here today is to reflect and think about what's working, what's not working, why isn't it working, and then addressing it. And along the way, we're providing you tools and resources to help you to have these conversations and start thinking about how might we move forward to improve. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Dr. Lori Olson. Do we have sound?
It's a new day for English learners in California. In July of 2017, the State Board of Ed unanimously passed a new policy called the English Learner Roadmap, which supersedes the old Proposition 227 English Learner Policy. The English Learner Roadmap is a clear turn away from the days of deficiency-oriented views of English learners. It's a turn away from the old English only world and sentiment. And it's really embracing a future for California that's about preparing our kids, not just for career and college readiness, of course, but also for leading and thriving in a global, multilingual 21st century world. In November 2016, the voters of the state passed Proposition 58, the EDGE initiative, which basically said, we want our children to have more opportunities to become proficient in multiple languages. It was followed shortly after by the development of this new English Learner Roadmap, which says, for our English learners, we want an education that'll best prepare them for the 21st century, and that includes high-level intellectual work with all of the supports they need to engage in that kind of work, and with an education that gives them the opportunities to develop skills in multiple languages. The English Learner Roadmap provides our districts and our schools with a clear, comprehensive statement of what needs to be put in place for our English learners if we're going to get them to the education that we know that they need. It covers everything from professional development, leadership development, assessment, alignment, preschool through high school, the quality of instruction, the access to the courses students need to be college ready by the time they graduate. It covers the climate and the attitudes in our schools and the need to create safe, affirming, inclusive environments for our children that embrace the languages and cultures they bring. The English Learner Roadmap will mean for our English learners an education of a breadth and a depth that has not been available to them thus far. The English Learner Roadmap, to the extent that it's really fully implemented, will mean for students that they really do have preparation for college, that they really will have the facility in multiple languages, which will give them connections both to family and heritage and to other cultures and communities and to jobs all over the world. The English Learner Roadmap will mean that our students get science and social studies and the arts and are able to be full participants in the academic setting and full participants in their world and is able to get them to their goals.
Academics, discussions, participation. 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
So at this point, I just want to give you just a few seconds to pause and process and think about what you know and understand about the English Learner Roadmap. If this is the first time that you hear the description or even about the English Learner Roadmap, I want you to think about what from the video clip really helps you ask the question, we need to address this at our district. I'm not sure this is happening at our sites. I don't know that these services are being provided to our English learners with disabilities. So we really want you to have a reflective approach to our presentation here today, so that not only are you introduced to these resources and tools, but you are really thinking about how might you use them in an effort to improve current practices and policies. Again, this is an opportunity for us to take perhaps a step back, to pause, process, think about where we are, and reach out to other collaborators, to other people within our organization that may be asking themselves the same question. After all, we have this charge to work together to improve outcomes for all of our students. And for those students that need specialized services, our English learners, our English learners with disabilities, we need to make sure that we're familiar with we need to make sure that we not only are familiar with what federal and state law requires, but that those are requirements are trickling down and are becoming our policies and practices, and that everybody that our students come across, whether they are for a fraction of the day or throughout the day, are familiar with what is required and are able and have the capacity and the ability to implement the appropriate practices so that those services are meeting their very specific and unique needs. As leaders, we have that responsibility. We take on this charge to be able to support practitioners and support staff who work directly with students. And so I ask you that as we come across these resources, the EL roadmap, the ELD standards, designated and integrated ELD, if this is the first time that you are hearing about these services, these resources, then I ask you, what is your next step as a leader to help yourself become more aware of what is required so that you're able to better support those that are working directly with students? Because again, this very unique population would have very unique needs. And as we look at the demographics in the state of California, more and more children are coming in with very different needs. And we have to think about our current climate in light of, these last couple of years, being isolated, not having contact with teachers, the lapse in gaps in knowledge, as a result of not having a full, rich curriculum. So all of those have an impact on our students, on top of those that already have an identified area of need via their 504, their IEP, and our kiddos who are learning English as a second language. We have to take into consideration several aspects of learning and the potential barriers that can impede learning outside of what we already know to be true, that is evidenced by their EL status and their IEP. So lots to think about. It is complex. And so we need to approach it as complex as it is, so that our problem solving approach is that of an integrated approach, that we lean on each other to help think through how to improve our current systems and practices. The first resource that I want to share with you out of the Practitioner's Guide is Figure 6.1. I often use this resource. That was the first time that I came across it. It was specifically designed for English learners. This particular one is for English learners with disabilities. So if one of my friends can drop the link in the chat, just to give you a few minutes to explore it. Again, this is a good document, a good resource that is research-based to help begin that conversation about what are my beliefs, what is it that I employ in my classroom, in my site, in my district, that perhaps may not be culturally and linguistically responsive. This resource helps us think through those critical elements and tenets of supports for English learners, in this case, English learners with disabilities. And if we are thinking about what's on this document, and we're not sure what that looks like at our site, it's a good gauge in terms of how to be specific about what areas we want to move forward in. So because these are values for educating English learners with disabilities, we expect to see them, right? We expect to have evidence for these values. We expect to have evidence for culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. Rather than say that we do, we want to be able to show evidence that it's happening in place, that there is equity and intellectual richness in our curriculum. What is the evidence of that? That content knowledge and language development occur in tandem. So what is the evidence of that? How do we support our teachers to be able to do that successfully? That attention to specific language needs is a common practice at our site, and going on and on, right? So again, this is a good resource, one pager. What I usually do is I kind of cut them up and I share them out, and I have people talk about what does this look like in practice at our site. And so you begin to have that conversation of what's there and what's not there. And as a group, you're able to identify what might be an area of need and move forward that way. This resource comes from the ELA-ELD framework. We use it often to really emphasize the role of English language development. So if you look at it zooming in, you'll see that at the center of this resource, it's called the Circles of Implementation. At the center of this resource are the ELD standards. And you might be asking yourself, well, if this is for all students, not all students are English learners. And you would be correct in that statement. However, the reason why in this particular resource, the ELD standards are in the center is because for those students who are English learners with that missing circle in the middle, then we are not able to provide access to all the other connected circles around it. The ELD standards is the resource that is specifically designed and is afforded to us, administrators, EL coaches, teachers, practitioners, special education teachers who are authorized to teach English learners. It is the #1 resource, our go-to resource when designing and implementing English language development instruction. Without this resource, we're shooting darts in the dark, right? We're missing the mark completely because we're not taking into consideration language acquisition principles. We're not taking into consideration the student's language proficiency level and what he or she may be able to do at that proficiency level within the 4 domains: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. We're not taking into consideration the direct correlation from the ELD standards to the Common Core standards. All of these things that I just described are how, by design, the ELD standards are organized. So it behooves us in leadership roles to ensure that our practitioners, case managers, support staff, teachers of all English learners and English learners with disabilities are familiar with and are using the ELD standards to design English language development instruction for all of their English learners, including their English learners with disabilities. On the note of language being at the core or at the center of learning, I want to take some time to pause and ask this question. So feel free to give us a response in the chat box. Will learning in 2 languages be confusing for English learners with disabilities? So as you're thinking about what might be the answer to this question, and if I've learned anything working here, is that there's a lot of gray area, right, when we're talking about students with disabilities. But this question has come up quite a bit. And so we're interested to hear what your thought process is as you are thinking about this question and the response to this question. I don't see any responses in the chat just yet. Right, we do see it depends on the disability. No. Some find it helpful to use both languages and sign, right? Some no, some yes. So there's a range of responses. And so here the answer is no, simply because there is no evidence to support that. However, it is critical that we absolutely take into consideration not only the disability, but where does it primarily manifest? And so also we want to take into consideration what is the language of instruction. Without opening a huge can of worms, I do want to call out our dual language programs. So if you are a leader in a dual language program and you're pausing and responding to this question, this is where you really need to ensure that you have current, accurate student data, that you're familiar with the services in the form of English language development instruction that the child is receiving, and that and understand what percentage of the target language the student is engaging in throughout the day. And I'm talking specifically about dual language programs, to help you come together with the IEP team and make the determination of where the goal and what language should the goal be addressed. Again, I said I don't want to open a can of worms, but I know that often does. But it's important for us as leaders to be thinking about and talking about these questions. And oftentimes when we don't ask the question, then we're missing an opportunity to address a very unique need and an opportunity to really improve our systems. So again, the answer is no. It is not confusing for a child. However, we do have to think about what other barriers may already be in the mix that will impede the student to progress when in a dual language program. And that includes English language development. That includes how well the supports that are designed for either their linguistic supports or their supports designed for their area of need, how well are they implemented. There are other factors that may impede a student to progress who is currently receiving instruction in a dual language program. However, we need to make sure that before we decide on one language over the other, that we have the evidence and student data to help us make the best possible decision. Oops. So let's spend a little bit of time reviewing comprehensive ELD. If you were with us a few sessions ago, we went over what comprehensive ELD is. And so in the state of California, English language development instruction is comprised of two types of English language instruction. And as practitioners, we are required to implement both, not either or, regardless of the language proficiency level. Because sometimes I hear, oh, well, they're at a higher proficiency level, so we're only going to focus on integrated ELD. As long as a student is an English learner, as per Title III, we are required to provide English language instruction. And in the state of California, English language instruction, again, is comprised of these two types of English language development. Integrated ELD, as you can see here, is how we take the content, scaffold the content by the student's language proficiency level by using different types of tools or strategies, for example, language frames and visuals or graphic organizers, so that the content is accessible, so that students are able to access the math, the science, the social studies, the language arts, because we're taking into consideration the student's language proficiency level and are able to use the ELD standards to support, or I dare say scaffold, your content based on the student's proficiency level. So the ELD standards serve as a tool to help us scaffold the content for integrated ELD. And this happens across the instructional day for all of your English learners. Because this happens in the content area, all of your students are being exposed to and perhaps even using some of the tools and strategies that you are specifically using for your English learners. But they are beneficial for our students. Some of the examples that I gave you, for example, language frames, which will more than likely be academic language frames, and graphic organizers, which are a research proven strategy to help organize and build comprehension. These are tools that you want all of your students to have access to because it improves learning and it helps students gain academic language. So although you're going to be using them specifically for your English learners, all of your students will benefit. Now let's move into designated ELD. Designated ELD is a protected time of your instructional day, like math, like science, like social studies, like language arts. You have this block of time specifically dedicated for English language development. The goal of designated ELD is language acquisition. And for this purpose, we want to do our very best to group students during this part of the day, during this block of time, by their language proficiency level. That is, you're going to group your emerging level students in one group for one part of the day. And that may mean that you pull kids from different classrooms if you're in an elementary setting, group them together, assign a teacher to focus on that particular level so that the goal is for students to move from that particular level to the next by the end of the year, if not sooner. The ELD standards are your focal standards. That is, we are using the ELD standards as the primary resource for designing and delivering ELD instruction, in this case, designated ELD instruction. Through this type of ELD instruction, students are gaining and accessing the opportunity of participating in language use so that they can go from, let's say, the emerging level to the expanding level. of language proficiency. And through that process, they're developing their listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills respectively as you move across the school year when you're focusing on designated ELD. So as you can see, these are two types of ELD instruction, and you see how they are connected. So during designated ELD, students are learning about English, how to use English, and how English becomes progressively more complex through the proficiency levels so that they can have access, better access in the content area. And through the content area, when they receive integrated ELD, other supports like language frames, like graphic organizers, like visuals, like partner groups are your go-to strategies to help students access the core. So I think a couple of sessions ago, we shared this resource. Want to give credit where credit is due. We use this resource very often to help you become familiar with the different characteristics of a comprehensive ELD. I'm looking at the clock and we just have a few short minutes together. So I just want to point it out. And if you were with us a few sessions ago, you're familiar with it. But I do want to share that this resource is for adults, for teachers. There was a question about using it with kiddos. It really is designed for practitioners, for leaders, to help us have some common understanding of what comprehensive ELD is. And so that's what this is for. So if give yourself some time to explore this resource, hopefully before the end of the session, because if I don't do things right away, they tend to fall off my memo and I have to kind of scurry back to go pick it up where I left off. So again, this is a great opportunity for you to share with your staff and have a conversation about what comprehensive ELD is, what it isn't, and what it's comprised of. So I'm going to fast forward. You have this in your slide deck. And again, it's an opportunity to build some common language, common understanding around comprehensive ELD. For English learners with disabilities, it's important to take note that as they progress through language acquisition, they may manifest some skills and abilities that may be lower in some of the domains than in others. And it's important for us to take note that that is completely quote unquote normal or typical of language acquisition. So we want to make sure that as English learners with an IEP or a 504 are progressing through language acquisition, and when we see these, what we maybe consider lags or laps in language acquisition, it has nothing to do with their disability, but it's important for us to take note and consider the disability so that we're able to see where does it manifest, and then we can able to kind of discern is the progress that is the lack of progress that they're making as a result of poor English language development. You know, maybe we're not being rock solid in providing English language instruction, or is it truly just a manifestation of their disability? But again, it's important to note that as students are learning English, you're going to see maybe some higher levels in listening and speaking and a little bit less in their reading and writing. And that's very typical of English language acquisition. Again, it's important for us to also consider, where is ELD instruction occurring? Are we ensuring that students have language models? After all, English language instruction and English language acquisition, so much of what we are understanding and learning depends on our language models as we are learning English in our younger years, actually all through your K-12 years. The more students have an opportunity to use language in an authentic way, to engage in conversations, whether they're social or academic, with their peers, the more opportunities they will have to acquire language and to own the language and therefore progress in their English language acquisition. So again, this is a conversation that we want to ask ourselves and have with others about, where is English language development occurring for our students with our ELs with an IEP? Is it the least restrictive environment? And if it isn't, then again, we bring that to the table and have a conversation about how do we address it so that the student is progressing linguistically and academically. A good model to employ, if you haven't already, is co-teaching. Again, it goes back to providing teachers with the appropriate training and supports, and that they understand what the different types of co-teaching model. Figure 611 is a table that kind of gives us the gist of the different co-teaching models. We will have, I think we have a flyer already, Deb, for our next co-teaching session. It's scheduled in March. So if this is a new area for you and you're interested in learning more about what co-teaching is, we invite you to our next session. It's going to happen, it is in March. I don't remember the date. Hopefully one of my friends will drop the flyer in the chat box, and we hope to see you there. But again, this is a great strategy to help design opportunities for students to engage in language acquisition and in academics in the least restrictive environment. So additional tools to help provide access are the accessibility resource matrix. This is a recently updated one. So if you had one from last year, know that this is actually a newer, there have been a few modifications. It's important for us to take into consideration the types of supports that our kiddos need. We have a couple of resources here, that the accessibility resources for LPAC computer-based and LPAC paper pencil. Again, in order for us to gauge how well students are acquiring English, we want to make sure that we are affording them the supports that they need to be able to accurately show us what they know. And so here are some resources to help us do that. Again, training is critical. It's important for teachers who are utilizing these supports, not only during the assessment, but throughout instruction, that they're familiar with the student's language proficiency level and their area of need. And of course, progress monitoring is critical. Once you employ a specific strategy or tool or support, in order to ensure that it is absolutely doing what it's designed to do, we need to progress monitor. Because if it isn't, then we're presenting yet another barrier for progress. The last couple of things that I want to share with you as we're rounding the corner with this very fast hour together is one of them is an English Learner Roadmap reflection tool. Earlier, I mentioned that if you visit our landing page on the English Learner Roadmap, maybe one of my friends can drop in the link, you will find a range of resources designed for different roles. We have administrator tools, we have practitioner tools, elementary, secondary. We didn't create them. We just put them all in one place for you to be able to access them easily. But the one that I want to share with you today that's found in chapter 6 is the self-reflection tool. And this is going to help us to begin to have a conversation, taking into consideration the principle 1, which the focus is assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools. So I would encourage you to spend some time becoming familiar with these resources to help you begin to have the conversations again of what's working. How do we know it's working? And if it's not working, what is the area that we need to focus on and address? So the English Learner Roadmap Reflection Tool is one of many resources that we recommend you use in your team conversations with your staff, with your multidisciplinary team, as you are reflecting upon your current processes and practices. And the next tool that I want to share with you is the least restrictive environment self-assessment tool. Again, similar to the EL roadmap, this tool is going to help us to at least begin to have that conversation about are we absolutely ensuring that our students with an IEP or a 504 are receiving services in the least restrictive environment. You may be using a different tool. This is one that is highlighted in the practitioner's guide. So if you're not using a tool, or if you're having a conversation and you want to be able to structure it and organize and really call out areas of need and best practices, this is one that can be found in the practitioner's guide that will address those topics of conversations. And 5 minutes to spare, 4 minutes to spare. I apologize for being a talking head today, but there are lots of resources to share and lots of information for you to process. At this point, I want to kind of close up my end of the presentation, open it up to Debbie and Christina if there anything that I might have missed or that you want to chime in on, and also to give you some time to drop in your questions or comments in the chat.
Thank you, Lupita. So much to share and lots of information to impart to the field. As Lupita shared, we will stay on for another 6 minutes or so just to see if there are any questions. We'll go ahead and stop the recording at this point. We want to say thank you for all of your participation.